Good morning, community college family. I hope you're having a good day today and doing pretty well. I want to thank you for joining this morning for the RDS, I'm tongue tied, excuse me, the RDS Community College Training. Um, we decided to do this training because it has been asked.
Monty, you muted yourself.
How did I mute myself? I think JJ muted me. I'm sorry. Thank you, JJ, because he's muting everyone. I'll start
I've,
over
I've been trying
then.
to figure out how to mute you for years.
Well, he's not going to show you. How about that? Again, since I was muted, I want to thank everyone for being on this call this morning. I know you're busy and your time is valuable. Um, but again, I know that many have asked for RDS training for a while now. And so I want to thank first my committee who put this training together. That is Jesse Cross, who you just heard come at me for a second, and Gene Ritter from SEAA, and Antonio Jordan from Vance Granville Community College, and Heather Azu from Forsyth Tech. Oh, and also, I'm sorry, Jesse Cross is from Gifford Tech Community College. They spent their time. They took a lot of time and went through this training to determine what you all would need, and they put this together. And so they're going to provide this to you this morning. But first, a few housekeeping rules. If you would, if you're not muted, could you please mute yourself? Um, if you decide to leave, just jump off and jump back on. We don't want a lot of background noise because we are recording this morning for those who could not join us. So we need it to be as quiet as possible in the background. Also, if you have any questions throughout the training, please save those questions until the end, unless they are pressing questions about what we're actually really talking about at the moment. If there's something that can't wait and you think you will not remember, either interrupt or put them in the chat box and we will get to those right away. So for with further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn everything over to Jesse Cross.
Good morning. I know this is everyone's favorite topic, and I've been dealing with residency for quite some time. So trust me, if you're new to residency or newish to residency, RDS is a good thing. Um, so compared to back in the day, love it. So today we're just gonna have quick grounding kind of history of where it came from. Gene's gonna give us some great insight on um, what happens at RDS, because even though Gene's at SEAA now, he spent quite a bit of time in the call, overseeing the call center at RDS. So Gene knows a ton about what happens in the Magic Box over there in Raleigh. We're going to talk about some stuff on continuous enrollment, campus responsibilities, resources, and then, like Monty said, we'll have a Q&A at the end. Um, Antonio is monitoring the chat, so if there's just something that's tearing you sideways in the middle, you can throw it in the chat, and Antonio will let us know if we need to address something immediately. But if not, we're going to try to blow through this so that we have some good question time at the end. So we'll move on to the history of RDS. So this all came from some legislative action a while back. We won't go into the details of it, but basically there was some consideration that not all schools across all sectors were applying residency statute the same. So, as all good things come, if you watch Schoolhouse Rock as a kid, there was some folks in Raleigh that got together, wrote a bill. The bill passed. It got stamped. Boom. Universal residency determination across North Carolina was passed. Wow, that's great. How are you going to do that? Well, since CFNC and CFI had really, been the leaders in universal application and such a resource for financial aid, it just made sense to let CFI implement this new law. So HECAC was formed, which is the Higher Education Collaborative Advisory Committee, and that committee kind of oversaw the development of RDS. So kind of two things were going on at the same time. I spent a ton of time in Raleigh with people from the university, from CFI, the programmers at CFI, just trying to bust down the residency statute and make it this kind of interview TurboTax kind of thing that we have. But now that we're in place and we're rolling, residencies used across all the sectors, private, public, and community colleges. HECAC strives for continuous improvement. So if we continuously see questions on the interview that cause people trouble, or we see things that are troublesome in the statute, we reach out to the legislative branch and try to see if we can get some things pushed through to make residency better. So just want you to know that HECAC's comprised of people from all the sectors, Monty, myself, tons of people from the community college system. Then we've got folks from the university system. We've got folks from private. We've got people from SEAA, from CFI. So there's just tons of people that sit on HECAC, always trying to look at it and make it better. So know that that's going on. So what we're going to hear now is from Gene, where he's just going to kind of dissect what kind of happens over there and give you some insight as to what happens in Raleigh.
Okay, good morning. Thanks, Jesse. So by way of introduction, I know a lot of you, either from my time years ago in community college system and or having worked at CFI and residency. Just to explain a little bit about SEAA and how that fits in the picture. It's actually SEAA, the State Education Assistance Authority, that is named in the statute as the responsible agency. And so CFI, CFNC, RDS, all that is contracted out to them, as are many other services for the state. And SEA is kind of a division of the UNC system office. So the role of SEA is primarily to give guidance, policy guidance, and then hear the final level of appeals. And at the end of this, I'll give you, we're going to give you resources about, so I have a problem, I don't know who to contact. I know that gets a little confusing. So if you're new to this, we'll give you some discussion at the end. In approaching this, it's really tough. And first of all, you're going to start seeing some slides that have a lot of text on them in a minute. Don't worry about it. You're going to get a copy of this presentation. And it's a lot of wordiness, and I'm not going to read it to you, I promise, but it's meant to be a resource document. But the way I approach this part of it is, after now several years of being live, and we have done almost 1.6 million determinations, and that's about 1.4 million unique students. How I thought I'd approach this is, what are the top questions that RDS gets from campuses, from students, at the call center, and kind of go through that. So in terms of campuses, these are the kinds of questions we get, most frequently, especially as, the students there at the last minute. Classes are starting today. They just did RDS, where they say they have an appeal pending. What's the status? What are we going to do? Sometimes saying the student doesn't understand, their determination. Difficulty, you can't pull a particular determination in. These are the kinds of calls, typically calls, but emails that go to RDS. At the RDS side, there's two different call centers, if you will. The one is unique to students, and they will help the students through the interview, answer their questions. What's the next step? What's going on? And we'll look at some of those questions. And then we have that separate campus line to help campuses troubleshoot, answer questions you have. Sometimes it's the history of the students. Oh no, I got in, and and they have an out of state, so we can look up history and things like that. As well as when you get to some of these uncommon scenarios, exceptions, what do I do? What's the story with this person's immigration? Or I have a veteran who's a non-resident, or, those kinds of campus-based responsibilities, those come down in there. But this is more or less, I went back and looked at call logs and things like that, the most common kinds of calls we get. So, understandably, the students there at the last minute. Most students, by the way, if you're new to the system, should get a preliminary unvalidated determination in their initial consideration. And that was done really to help our community college students, the ones that show up the last minute. You're not going to show up the first day of classes at UNC Chapel Hill State or many institutions say, here I am, can I apply for admission, get financial aid, and sign up for classes today. When the student comes back and asks for an appeal or a reconsideration, they do not get an immediate provisional determination at that point. This is just something to help get them registered, if at all possible, in the door. But these are the most common kinds of questions that come in from campuses, either on the phone or email. Okay. We'll come back again. We're going to have plenty of time for questions. This is just kind of a quick overview, refresher, and to give you some sense of what we're seeing, particularly in a minute from students. So if we could go on, Monty, please, the next one. Oop.
You shared your screen or something and it knocked the slide off. Hold on.
I did not. I did not.
Let me see if I can get it back.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, something happened.
Something happened. I didn't hit the share screen.
Okay, let's see.
It's actually not giving me an option to share screen, so.
Give me a few seconds and
Yeah.
I will head back for you.
Okay. So I'll start talking about that, but it's showing you as guest, so I don't know if you knocked yourself off as presenter or what. So anyway, I will move on and talk about that. So, what are the top reasons that students call into the call center? And again, I've rank ordered these in frequency, and it's interesting. The number one, let's see. I'm sorry. The first one I was going to talk about what are the top reasons they get out of state. Okay, and I'm trying to gear the comments to what you're seeing at the community college system. It's a little different from students that are out of state attending a 4-year, in terms of the frequency of kinds of issues. There we go, and that one. Okay, thanks. So,
right.
Students who get an immediate non-resident, these are the most common reasons in terms of order frequency. And if you take those first three, that accounts for more than 60% of the students that have to come to a reconsideration. It is a huge issue of students keying in an incorrect social security number and or date of birth. They're actually asked to key it in twice to try to, catch that. It's a huge issue. And in that case, information doesn't validate and or you can't match it up, in your system. We caution students about that. There's all kinds of warnings and, red flashing warnings, but, that happens. The other thing is, not providing enough information. I love it when a student comes back and says, but I've lived here all my life, but they skip over all the questions. I mean, we don't know if a student says no to everything. I have no driver's license, vehicle registration, voter registration. I have no employment. I've never paid taxes. I don't receive any kind of DHHS support in terms of Medicaid or food stamps or anything. They say no to everything or only say yes to one thing. We have no way of knowing. So there's nothing to validate. And then keying in other information wrong, just making up a driver's license number or something. We tell students, please, if you're not sure, save and come back to the system. Don't make up numbers or skip over things. Those first three account for well over 60% of the students that have to come back. It's just moving fast, careless. Okay, that ultimately they end up getting in state.
Can I slide in here, Gene, just for a second?
Sure.
If your mic is not muted, please do so. We got somebody that's just got a call-in number We're getting some background noise, so if you could, please mute. We are recording so people can hear this later. Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse. So the next most frequent is the student says, I'm 18 and they want to try to show independence. If they're not it gives them the option currently to do that. That's going to be changing in terms of age to 19 soon. I'll talk about that later. But in terms of a legal interpretation, but they're given the option saying it doesn't look like you're going to pass. The state law says that, the student must show, we're going to assume you're dependent of your parents unless you can show you're independent. So, they've got to have that. So that's next in order, but really the first three are huge in terms of the numbers that just get knocked out unnecessarily. The others are typical kinds of things we see less frequently. Someone who just moved here. In terms of documents, by the way, as we've developed the system, we're only asking for documents in an initial consideration or reconsideration when we cannot verify that information with a particular agency. There's really just two main reasons at this point, and that is active duty military who are not residents here but are stationed here, and then immigration status. There's just not an easy way for us to do that electronically. Almost everything else now, we have stopped having to ask for documents. If they get to an appeal, they have additional information, or they're saying the databases are wrong, certainly they could submit documents. So it's very few, but if they don't turn them in, that's one. So these are the typical kinds of things, just so you know, of why a student might not get in. And until you get down to like the last couple situations there, really it's something that could have easily been corrected when they went through. If they don't have an eligible immigration status or they haven't lived here 12 months, there's not much, that can be done about that in most cases. But the other things, it really is students rushing through. Okay, so those are the most frequent reasons we see in terms of reconsideration. It is not, I think people feared early on, people are going to, students are going to have all these special circumstances and whatnot. We've built in so many possibilities in the dynamic interview to try to account for almost everything we could. And then if all else fails, they can come to an appeal and they talk one-on-one with someone. But that is really a very small percentage of students who are getting out of state in the initial. Okay, if we can go to the next slide, please. So in terms of their calls to the call center, and I've given you these rank order. The number one is, I don't remember my login or password. I mean, that's 60, 70% of the calls. The students can set up, security questions to pull that, and a lot of them skip over it and don't, or saying, I don't remember the answer to it. But they can call, I don't know the status. I don't know what to do. I don't know what the next thing is. I don't understand. Really, for all of these, except maybe one of them, the student can get this information if they log into their account. The account will always tell them the next steps if they disagree with the determination in terms of reconsideration appeal. It will tell them if they owe any documents. It will give them deadlines. It will, the only thing it won't do is give more detailed information about if they got an out-of-state determination. They can call and talk to someone about it if they have questions about the, understanding something. But other than that, really, I mean, most of this information is available on there. There's a great dashboard if they log back in saying whether or not, they owe any documents, whether it's complete, whether it went through final validation, how long it's valid. So it's a good dashboard with like kind of green light, red light, if you will, says yes or no. So those are the most frequent reasons. Hopefully that'll help you understand when a student's coming in. And they can always call the call center. And that student call center will help a student through their interview, answer general questions, or get into specifics with them. Okay, if we could move on then. I'm going to start talking about this and then hand this off to Jesse and maybe Heather about continuous enrollment. The policy is that a student, when they get a determination, it is generally good for 15 months from the date of the determination. And that was kind of set through HECAC and other feedback of if a student's like in high school and they're applying, how long should this be good for if they don't enroll right away? And so that gives them the chance, if they don't enroll in fall, they can enroll the following spring, they're good. If it's beyond that, it was felt we need to check fresh data to make sure that the family didn't move and now they're trying to come back to go to school. So, but once they're enrolled and stay continuously enrolled, then there is really no need for them to come back for a new determination. That continuous enrollment has to be, generally in the past, has had to be tracked by the campus. We have something in place now that will help with that, okay? And that is that we are now transmitting files to the National Student Clearinghouse that everyone reports their enrollment statistics to, and we get a file back saying, yes, this student has been enrolled the past semester. And based on that, RDS is automatically moving out the expiration date for another year. Where that's very helpful is, in the past we've had issues where a student, let's say, is attending one institution, they've been there a year or two, and then they, want to take a summer class somewhere else, and then it's expired, and there's no way for that new institution to see it. So this is in place. The last wave of students being caught up in that should be caught up in the spring transmission in May. There's a couple of exceptions, and those are ones that when it is based on some sort of exception, it's not the normal, yes, IRS gives them that in determination they're a resident. So for example, military that are non-residents but are stationed here, they get that out of state determination but eligible for in-state residency. The other type of exception that is held out is a student with an immigration status that expires. Basically that's visas and temporary protected status, not your green card holders. But so if their visa expires, their eligibility hinges on having a valid visa. So the student would have to come back through RDS, or the campus would have to check it. We'll come back to that because they're only eligible if they continue to have a valid visa. So that's become largely automated now. I'm going to let Jesse and or Heather talk about how the campus has tracked that in the meantime, because RDS doesn't know when or where the student enrolls ultimately, or whether they've been continuously enrolled. So I'll let Jesse talk about how the campus has handled the ones that are not automatically extended.
Yeah, so basically that just has to come from your workflow, your business practice on how you have students apply. So what we've done at GTCC, and I know several schools have done, if they haven't, they kind of make the reapplication process match the expiration of RDS to catch any of those folks that may have an RCN number out there, but it's going to come in as expired. So for us, if a student doesn't take a class, which would at GTCC match continuous enrollment, which again, the definition is a class taken either fall or spring, summer's omitted. So if you miss fall, spring, or spring, fall, we would require a student to reapply. That way, if they have to update their RCN, we'll get that. But if it comes through as one of the multitude that will be automatically updated, then the student doesn't have to mess with going through a new consideration just to come for a summer class in the time they're off from university or whatnot. Now there is one kind of exception this year to continuous enrollment. Back when we kicked off RDS, there were a lot of students who are already enrolled. We didn't want to make them go through the determination, so they were grandfathered in, and as long as they remain continuously enrolled, they didn't have to go to RDS, do a consideration, receive an RCN, any of that stuff. Now this year, because financial aid uses continuous enrollment uses RDS to determine eligibility for state grants, they've decided that they are only going to allow students going forward to have state grant eligibility if they have an RCN. So, if you go out and look at some of your folks that are getting the state grant, if they've been at your institution for a while and just continue picking at classes, they might lose state grant eligibility. So you need to make sure you go out, contact those students that fall in that category, and just have them go out to RDS, complete the initial consideration, import their RCN data, and as long as it comes as an in, they're going to be fine to get the state grant continued. But if they don't go out and just maintain continuous enrollment at your school, they're going to be ineligible for state grant. So, a little twist for you. And even when we were first semester, so we don't have a ton because we're going back all the way to the beginning. So I think this year, I think maybe we had 9 when we went and looked at students that would fall into state grant eligibility and didn't have an RCN. So over the years, almost all of our students have either broken continuous enrollment, transferred, stopped out, one of those things, and when they come back, they have an RCN. So maybe a little bit bigger at some of the schools that went live later, especially the bigger institutions, Wake Tech, CPCC, you might see a few more. So that's good news. That's been on the wish list at HECAC for a while to be able to transmit that continuous enrollment data. So that's a huge win that should cut down on lots of extra calls to the call center. So now we're going to move into what is your responsibility as the campus. You still have some responsibility. Just because we have centralized residency determination, since we have the call center, you don't just get to throw up your hands and say, oh, I'm out of the residency business, freed up my day. We still got some stuff we got to pay attention to. So immigration, supporting our students, and tracking the exceptions. So we're going to roll up in immigration first. Boop. I need one of those clicker things to make money. Move the slide. So immigration, we've got a lot of students that fall into different categories. So one of the things, HECAC or not HECAC, RDS only validates things that they need to validate. So when we have resident aliens, you might have someone that has a short-term permanent resident card who maybe falls out of status, and just because they say they're a permanent resident and apply on the application, you don't know that that card's still valid. So it is still important on a campus to make sure that you're looking at residency documents for any non-citizens, because we need to make sure that, yes, that's actually their status, because I don't know if you have any students, but periodically at Guilford Tech, we have some folks that misremember. They might say they have a permanent resident card when really they're DACA, or they may say that they have a permanent resident card when really they're undocumented completely. So seeing that document is important. Visa holders, seeing that documentation keeps you in compliance to make sure that you have eligible students at your institution. Visas come and go. Is the visa expired? Are they overstays and really not eligible to have that status as a visa holder? There's always been this discussion on whether overstays really become undocumented, and it's kind of been the practice that if it's an overstay, they fall into your undocumented bucket. But how does your school handle undocumented students? So undocumented students are meant not to displace any legally present person. So if the person says they have a valid visa, and then you look at the date and see that it's ineligible, really that person is an overstay and needs to fall in your undocumented category and not be able to proceed as a visa holder. And then, of course, you've got your super short-term visas that float around out there, like B1, they can't come to school at all. So they can do, Con Ed things that don't require any documentation, but as far as curriculum goes, they're not eligible. So seeing those documents on campus is your responsibility. It's nothing that RDS is going to fix, watch over, or pass you information on whether it's expired or anything like that. So you really got to be checking that stuff local. And then we'll go on to the next one, which is, supporting our students. The call center is great. We're going to go over tons of resources at the end. The FAQs are great. A lot of work went in to make sure they were written in English, which is way different than the statutes written. So trying to get it out there so staff, students really have that resource to be able to know what's going on. But as the person that the student's looking to for help, you have to know the RDS process. So if a student's just, frustrated and beating their head against the wall, how can you make that easier for them? If someone just freaks out because they get an out-of-state determination and don't know why, you have to be able to walk them through. Do you have a student who is a birthright citizen? Well, if you don't intercede and say, hey, you can appeal because you're a birthright citizen, you get past the prima facie proof that your domicile is the domicile of your parents. Well, that's not as important if you know that little bit and you can guide the student through. Direct the students to the resources. Have them call the call center. Have them check out those FAQs. Again, they're written in pretty plain English. You can glean a lot of information about residency just by flipping through those FAQs. And this puts a bit of a burden on the student. The technology supports it. It works on a tablet, it works on a phone, it works on a computer. But having a place where students can do the initial classification, the reconsideration, the appeal, and get some type of support, because I guarantee your students aren't going out searching the statute and figuring out what grounds they can even appeal on. They're just kind of left out there. So having someone that has that rudimentary understanding of the statute really just supplements what's online. But our students, they're not going to go read all that stuff. They're just going to get frustrated. Woe is me. They might, just throw up their hands and walk away. So you got to be that kind of voice of reason that says, okay, let's hear your situation, because most people, it's pretty easy. If you just listen to their story, you can kind of hear pretty quick, especially from Gene's like top 9 list, top 10 list of, what kind of questions or why are people out automatically. If you listen to their story, you're going to be able to figure out what they need to do to get the right determination. Also, you're going to be able to keep someone from getting frustrated, maybe a DACA student who chases residency all the way to the appeal. You could nip that early and go, look, until there's some, broad-based immigration reform in the United States, currently in North Carolina, as a DACA student, you can't get in-state tuition. Don't even bother with the reconsideration or the appeal because it's not there. So running the reports, this is, we're definitely not getting into the weeds on which mnemonics and colleague we have to run, but running those reports to make sure that you're not missing some determinations that are just hanging out there pending, running the reports to bring in the residency, cleaning up errors, cleaning up things. That's obviously a campus responsibility, and you need to make sure you're doing all that cleanup stuff in the background. Make sure that all your determinations are accurate. Participating in the liaison calls. when there's updates, when there's training opportunities, when there's questions, it's very, very important you've got somebody on your campus who's participating actively in the liaison calls, because that's your shot to, you get a private audience with Gene and Dr. Kelly at the system office. And they can really, that's your chain to get your voice heard with any trouble spots with RDS, trouble spots with colleague system not integrating back and forth. So it's very important that the person you have on the liaison calls is participating, taking notes, and passing that along when there's big changes or even little changes. And then I think probably the kind of a new one for everyone is really supporting those CCP students when they transition from current college promise to curriculum, because in the CCP world there's no requirement for the RDS, and that goes back to high school being required and something the state will provide, and college being a privilege, not a right. So how are you handling that transition? Is part of the spring CCP getting them to go into RDS and getting that ready? Do you make them go to an app so that it comes in? But how do you make sure that those CCP students transition easily without having RDS issues, or worst case, continuing in their free status and not getting charged tuition? Most of the time when people get a zero tuition bill, they don't really speak up too quick. So make sure you've got some kind of functionality in there to transition your career and college promise students from high school to college. Exceptions. Love exceptions. It's the best part. In the residency statute since the beginning, there have been tons of times where good-hearted legislators would see wrong in the system and create some kind of exception. And they live in the code, and there's a cluster that kind of really hit on universities as well as community college. So we did the top ones here. Refugees. The reason that RDS can't really pass an in for a refugee is because this is a community college exception. If a refugee goes to the university, they have to go through RDS and get the in-state just like always. But at a community college, if someone's a refugee, they get in-state immediately. So you would just need to look at the I-94, see the refugee status, and then you're good to go. They get in-state immediately. And just, note, the refugees are not asylees and are not permanent residents. So remember, refugees are a separate status from asylees. Asylees do have to go through RDS, and they do have to meet the 12-month rule. Transferred employees. This is a math equation for y'all. You can have 1% of your out-of-state population get in-state tuition if they can prove they were transferred somewhere from a North Carolina employee. So now, boom, you get to round up. So if you have 100 out-of-state students, you can give one person a semester in-state tuition because their parents were transferred or they were transferred. That's when you got to track. You got to have some kind of documentation from the employer that says this person, we definitely, when we put that on RGPE, put a null value at the end of the term so that they don't perpetually get that in-state, because after a year they should just go out and get the RDS determination. We got military and VA. The Veterans Choice Act allows military dependent spouses and service members to get that in-state status within 3 years. there's going to be an update to that starting in August. Not if I'm right, Gene. Yes, August, which basically covers fall. So that 3-year exception on Veterans Choice Act is going away. It's just a matter of were they honorably discharged going forward. So, if you've got to deal with any military, you're looking for DD 214 and then proof that the dependents are actually dependents. Nonprofit sponsorship, another fun one. Nonprofits can sponsor out-of-state students. They can only do this up to 5 instances a year. So if they've got 2 students and they go fall and spring, they can get in-state tuition. But if both those students want to do it in the summer, one of them's out of luck because a nonprofit can only sponsor 5 instances a year or 5 students one time. It's very, very kind of meh. It's not a great exception. Business sponsorships, North Carolina business sets up something for direct billing with your billing office, and that allows for in-state tuition. And then the most awesomest one of all, public high school graduates. So a legally present non-citizen who graduates from a North Carolina college, or I'm sorry, North Carolina high school, after being at that high school for a year, has right to in-state status, basically indefinitely, because they're a North Carolina graduate and they were not a U.S. citizen, but they had to be legally present at time that they were, and they graduated from the high school that they were assigned. So public high school graduate is the one that's most, fraught with peril, right? It's not U.S. citizens. They had to be in some kind of status. They had to be legally present, all those different types of things. So public high school is kind of the weirdest one, I think, of all. Probably the other one that falls in the weird category, folks that work for the University of North Carolina system get in-state tuition at community colleges immediately upon arrival, as long as they're full-time employees at the university system, whereas it doesn't flip. So community college employees, if you have a faculty member who moves here and their kid wants to take a class, they're going to pay out-of-state tuition for a year. So that's a bizarre one, that it was written specifically for university employees and not the whole public higher education sector. So exceptions, you got to track those. You got to make sure that you've got it all buttoned down, because you don't want them to go past their limit. And things like the business one or the nonprofit one, you want to make sure that one nonprofit's not sponsoring the world.
Hey, Jesse, can I interject one thing? The nonprofit one also is you can't be a U.S. citizen. Like it's also the legally present for nonprofit. That one and the high school are both weird in that respect.
Yeah. So, and where those things come from, typically it's, the legislation is passed to help some group, some constituent group. So, it was a very narrow bill that passed, and that's why they kind of read a little bit wonky. But yeah, the nonprofit one and the high school completer one are both for non-citizens.
Jesse, if I could jump in too, just add a couple things about these. The ones on this list are truly community college specific. So it's not generic across the board. And as you alluded to, the UNC system has a couple of their own, which are different. And those two sets of sector specific are actually written in different parts of law. This one is written a part of law pertaining to community colleges only, and then UNC has two pertaining to them, and the rest of residency law lies somewhere else. So that's the reason we've got some of these sector specific. That's just where it was included in the law. I know this particular section of law is something the system office is looking at right now and trying to see if they can advocate for some amendments in there with some legislators. The other thing I want to add about campus tracking, two things, is please don't worry about this if all this seems new to you or there's a whole bunch here. There is a campus responsibility manual that will walk you through each one of these step by step in terms of does it apply. We just want to give you an awareness of it that you say, hey, I know there's some sort of an exception, for example, of transferred employees, and it will walk you through the requirements and then the responsibilities for the campus. I want to point out one more kind of responsibility that's tracking that isn't necessarily campus or sector specific in this list. And that is, for example, there are some statuses, for example, immigration, that do have an expiration and you do have to track. And RDS does, to clarify, when the student comes through, we do ask for, if they indicate they have an eligible status, we do collect documentation on that to confirm it. But many of them expire. So what RDS will do is put a tracking date in. So if they have a visa, for example, that expires in 6 months, we flag that as something the campus has to track with the expiration date, and also make the expiration of the date of the determination less than that normal 15 months. So there are some things like that you would have to track. The other one that will be passed on for tracking, this is very uncommon, but if you have a North Carolina National Guard member who does not live in North Carolina, the statute says they, for example, we have some that live across the border in South Carolina, but they affiliate with an Air National Guard unit in Charlotte. They're not a resident, but they're eligible for in-state tuition. So we pass on a tracking date based on their contract, because when that contract ends, their exception ends. So there's a couple like that, but they are passed on in terms of a tracking flag and notification to the campus in addition to these. But yeah, these are the common ones. But you can, there's a campus responsibility manual, and you can always call us for guidance on these, and we'll be happy to help.
All righty, let's we're just gonna try now. Like at this point, I think some of this a little bit is common, should be common sense, but we're gonna throw it out there because I know we got a lot of new people on the call, maybe new to the North Carolina system, maybe new to the community college system. So when it comes to how we can best assist students, and I think this one's across the board, whether it's your system, CFNC, when you are talking to those students about, hey, you got to go out to RDS and do this residency, it's the same login for your application, you know, stress those little things. Like, you know, we all have a million passwords. No, don't use the same password for everything because that gets you in trouble. But, you know, stress to people, write this down. You're going to use it a lot. This is your username password for a long, long time, especially if you're going to transfer to university and you break continuous enrollment. But stress that if they keep their login and their password, that's going to cut down on the calls to the call center by a bazillion. And what that means is the call center is not helping people reset their passwords all the time. They can get to the real issues, and they can help people and be more efficient. You know, and then stress the accuracy thing. Like legit, go through the RDS determination yourself. You can see in there, when it asks social, it asks you twice. When it asks date of birth, it asks you twice. When things don't match and they go out to validate against the Department of Revenue or the DMV, why it bounces back is because it didn't match. It looks like you're trying to game the system. And when this was designed, the huge push was we didn't want anyone to be able to go in and game the system. How are we going to fake get in-state tuition? And, you know, that was a big thing. You know, we talked a lot about when we were doing the build, residency angels, people that used to sit around and help out-of-state students get in-state tuition because they knew the law and, you know, were, you know, sneaky. You know, so a lot of the reason that we can't see a list of the questions and all that stuff is because we don't want it to get out there how the system really works. So just know that it does go bounce against things, and if it's not accurate, it's not going to work. Tell people, don't guess, don't skip questions. You got to answer it if it pops up, because if you skip it, chances are that's not going to come back in your favor. We're going to get to tools in a minute. So we'll kind of skip over this one a little bit, but there's some specific stuff, we talked about earlier, birthright citizens, and like they're usually really cautious about their parents' information. The parents don't want to give up that they're, not legally present. You just have to assure them that everything in the interview is super secret, super private, protected. People freak out about not wanting to give their numbers. Their parents don't want to give up their social and all that stuff. CFI is like the little computery Fort Knox over there. They've got everybody's social already. If you've done a FAFSA, they know your numbers. You're not telling them anything new. So it's totally safe for the folks that, their parents are super cautious. It's safe. They're not going to get turned over to the Department of Homeland Security or anything. Make sure the students, especially the ones that are falling into that, where they're not fiscally dependent and they're, youngish, under kind of 24 range, put the parent information or the court-appointed people's information on there, because you're not going to get in-state by yourself if you don't make any money. I know sometimes, I had a woman who was 20 couple who lived with someone who paid all the bills and did everything, and she didn't have anything and kept getting out of state. Well, it's hard to prove when you don't have anything of your own. So make sure that they're understand they can put the parent information, the dependent or the guardian information on there, even if they're not in the same house. So let's go to the next one. And again, this one goes back to that. The law, the prima facie proof of dependent student's domicile is the domicile of the parent. Well, no one reads that and understands it, but what it means is the law is going to think that you're dependent unless you can prove it otherwise. Are you married? Do you have dependents of your own? Are you in the military? Do you make a certain amount of money? So if they don't have enough money to pay for school by themselves, they're going to have to show parent information. Again, RDS has done great stuff to minimize what kind of documentation students have to connect. They've made it easier. Back in the day, you couldn't do a PDF. Whoa. All right. So let's learn how to save a different way. But they've added PDF. They've reduced the number of things that people have to connect. So even though there's less stuff to connect, if the students don't do it, it's automatically going to flip them out. So stress to the students, if they need to keep checking, are they asking for anything? They might not ask today, but they might ask tomorrow. If students don't know where they're at, they can always log into RDS. Log in. Is it a big red no or is it a big green yes? What is it? And you can always go through. You can go through the initial classification, the reconsideration, the appeal, and it's still not done there. You can go to an SEAA appeal and have your moment in the sun. You can't handle the truth, because that's part of the law that you can take it that far. But I will say that appeals to the SEAA have dropped to a ridiculously low number. When I sat on the appeals committee, we did between 30 and probably 50 a month between all the sectors. They're doing like what, Gene, like 30 a year?
Probably a little less than that. Yeah, about 2 a month.
Yeah,
average?
so RDS is taking people going all the way to the top of the appeals chain from, somewhere in the neighborhood of 180, 200 a year to like 30. So, RDS really has become kind of an automated tool that, anybody that sat and did 2 levels of appeals on campus before it got sent to SEA, knows how much work this has taken off admissions offices. It can, just like anything, once it's out there for a minute, you kind of forget how awesome it is. But, from a longtime user, this is way, way better than those face-to-face appeals on campus. All right, let's go on to the next one. Now, Gene's going to talk about resources a little bit. We're crushing it on time. We're killing it. So we're going to have a little bit of time for Q&A after we get done with the resources.
Okay, so I mentioned that there are several resources. This first one is, if you're not aware of it, that it's our public website. As Jesse alluded, there's a lot of Q&As. If they want to see the actual statute, it's there. If they want to see the official RDS guidebook, it's there. There are also some great handouts, one-pagers, usually on a variety of topics that traditionally have been questions. And for example, there's some about what happens if the student it has been born here as a U.S. citizen, but parents may be undocumented or choose not to share information. A lot of those documents are also translated into Spanish. A lot of them have screenshots to walk them through how to, if they're in a special situation, how to go through the interview. So there's some really great things on there. Again, the student can log in at any time and see their status. It will walk them through, here's the difference between a reconsideration and an appeal. Here are your options. The call center, this is specialized one for students. This is the one to give to students. And these folks are expert at helping them get set, helping to answer questions about the interview. Sometimes they say, I don't understand this question, or what should I do in my situation? I don't live with my parent, I live with my grandmother, those kinds of questions. They don't have to live with a parent. If we can verify a parent that is in North Carolina, we've had ones that are incarcerated or whatnot, they're good to go, usually. So we can do some lookups if we know what's going on. So this is for the students. We recently changed the hours. It was open 8 to 8 Monday through Thursday, 8 to 5 on Fridays. And we found that other than during peak registration times, almost no calls were coming after 6 p.m. We might get one a day. And it was just decided that really wasn't a good use of resources. So during peak periods, when you're coming up on a peak registration period, we will open that back up for several weeks again and have extended hours. But these are the kinds of things they can help with. Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. So this one is for college staff only. Please don't give this to the students. And what this does is it's actually in a different building when we're in the building at RDS. This is the staff that handles the processing. So these are the people that handle the documents, handle the processing, do the reviews, handle the appeals, and they're more familiar with the inner workings of the system. The call center are more familiar with the questions students have and don't understand the campus pieces as well. So this is really for you. And this also, by keeping this line free just for campuses and the designated email, that we can respond more quickly. So that's your good first place to go if you have a question about a student, about their determination, that kind of a thing. General questions about RDS. If it's not a question they can assist with, and I'll make sure you all have my contact information. If it becomes a policy question or a interpretation or an immigration question, they're going to refer some of those to me from the staff there. But this is a really good place to start. If they can't help you with troubleshooting a problem you're having, they'll usually send it to me, but or if not, call or email me and we'll do that. And the public website. This is that ncresidence.org. That is one of several places the students can start their RDS determination if they want. Okay, they get, a lot of you all have your own links, but that's fine. It gives you that information again of what they have in there. At the bottom of the page, you will see a small link that says school administrators, and I've given you the username and password that everyone shares. And in there, we have some additional documentation, including that campus responsibility manual. Any additional policies or procedures that the campuses need to be aware of. But that campus responsibility manual, there's a copy there. Please download that, because that's going to answer some questions for you about some of these campus specific things that come up. And then the community college system has a couple of documents there you want to pull, and that's in the online knowledge base repository. The one is the curriculum user guide, understanding all the RDS, the screens and colleague, you can use the setup, the process you run just occasionally. There's an excellent FAQ and troubleshooting guide. Make sure you take a look at that if you're not familiar with it. It handles some of the common problems. A lot of times we get calls by saying, well, I keep running this report and the email comes back, and when I click on it, it says request pending. I wish the message was a little different. It's not pending at the RDS end, it's stuck in the colleague system, and that gives you a way to resolve it. So there's some really good tips for common problems. Won't handle everything, we get it. Give us a call. And I think we're about done with those.
Yes,
there's another resource out there that I don't know if people have heard about. It's called Google, Google. If you want to know what the C code is on an employment authorization card, Google it. It'll pop right up. If you want to know something on the RDS website and you don't want to search through the FAQs or the guidebook or whatever, Google it. Just to make sure I didn't say anything stupid today, I Googled a few things because, my brain doesn't always work. So, tons of resources, but also because it's all out there in the public, you can Google stuff, get it just as quick without scrolling through the RDS website. All right. Anybody, any questions?
There did come a question. We had a question from Dr. Hickman related, I think when Gene, you were speaking, and great job, Gene and Jesse, by the way, regarding homeless and jobless adults. If they have no income, they have no address information, they may have been taken in by another adult that is not their relatives. Can someone speak on that? Maybe Gene?
Yes, really, income is not in and of itself a requirement. The only time we're going to look at that is if a student is younger and wanting to be considered independent from their parents. And that comes up more frequently when you have the student who's moved here to go to school and their parents live in another state and they're saying, oh, I'm really independent. That's the only time we're going to look at an amount. Now, if they tell us they file taxes, we're going to look at what state that they claim as their residency. But no, in and of itself, the employment is not, or the amount you're making or the lack of employment is not going to be a disqualifier at all. As I said, the only time that's going to have to come into figure is if someone came here to attend a university last year, they're in their second year and saying, I've been here a year now, I want to be considered independent. We're going to look to see that financially they are independent from their parents. Other than that, it's not going to hurt them. They have to have something. And, homeless come in, that's one of the few that's going to come in. If they tell us they do not have a stable address history, then it's going to come in and they won't have an immediate determination to come in for review. And just like on appeals, someone will reach out to them within a business day or so and find out what's their situation and what can we piece together. We're just looking to see, have they been a resident? they've gone through some tough times or something. They didn't just arrive here yesterday, and we'll find a way to qualify them. But no, employment at that point or dollar amount is not on the table for a criteria. It would just be the students who the law says have to prove they're independent.
And in the interview, just for everyone's knowledge, probably one of the fourth kind of generic kickoff questions is, are you experiencing, and there's a whole laundry list of home instability situations. So what Gene's referring to is when they self-identify as something on that list, that's where they're probably not going to get an initial classification right away until someone at RDS talks to them.
Yeah, and let me talk about that list. That list was developed. We've had a lot of pushback from early on from high school counselors that the school systems will code a student as homeless under the McKinney-Vento Act if they meet one of many criteria. And simply, it's homeless or unaccompanied. They can have been living with their grandmother the last 10 years, but by their definition, that student is homeless or unaccompanied if the parent is not living in the same roof, under the same roof. Parent could literally be living next door. That statute is very different from ours in terms of residency. I mean, we ask details, we do that. I will tell you that 90-some% of the time, either they've been here long-term with a grandparent, that's not a problem, we use a 5-year rule, or the parents in North Carolina, they're just not living under the same roof. The only time we have a problem finding a way to qualify them is if they literally just arrived here less than 12 months ago. But that's why all those qualifiers, and that's what it is. I wanted to mention that because sometimes high schools will say, but they're homeless McKinney-Vento, they automatically get in. No, they don't automatically get in. We take that into consideration and look at the picture. They still had to have been here for a year.
It looks like Michelle has had her hand up for a little while.
Hi, I have a few questions based on some of the stuff that you guys said, some clarification. You talked about the updates for veterans and the in-state rate starting in August. Do you know how soon we'd get some of that information as we are admitting students for the fall semester now?
I think technically because it doesn't go into effect until August, depending on when you do your billing for fall, I don't think you can preemptively put a waiver on. So you may just want to put something on until August 1st when it becomes law. If your initial payment for fall is not till after August 1st, then you can make the adjustment there. But if you have Veterans Choice Act folks coming in for fall that are registering between now and August 1st, I would encourage that you not preemptively put that on there, because there's always, it's campus responsibility to keep proof that the veteran was honorably discharged. They're supposed to leave a statement of intent to establish domicile. So when you look at that, you definitely don't want to preemptively award that. But since fall doesn't start till after August 1st, anyone that comes in the next 5 months can qualify. I just wouldn't do it in advance.
Okay. And then we also, where's the other one? You talked about students needing to complete RDS who may have been continuously enrolled from before the initiation of RDS. Is every student going to have to do that, or only those who wish to receive state grants?
It's only the state grant folks. The other ones are still falling under continuous enrollment and the grandfathering thing. And within the memo that went out about that, so if you have students whose RCN is just expired, but they're continuously enrolled at your school, they're fine. They get to continue to use, continuous enrollment, and they're good. It's just that small percentage of folks that are eligible for state grant that never got an RCN. Now, is it possible that you have someone who this year did not qualify for state grant, but next year might? So that might be a campus decision. Go look, how many folks do you have that were grandfathered? Do you want to send out a note that says, hey, if you ever want to apply for state grant, you need to go get an RCN? Is that a can you want to open? We chose to just notify folks that were already eligible for state grant and receiving it this year, that they would be ineligible in the future, but we didn't tell anybody else that was grandfathered.
Okay. And then my next question, I don't know, I had emailed this to Dr. Hickman, and I know it's probably going to take more time to answer, maybe. But you talked about continuous enrollment. We have a large military population here, and the documentation, the Residency Determination Service Guidebook, talks about continuous enrollment not applying to active duty military, which I understand I'm supposed to track the student type and all the information that goes with that, and we do that. But I can't find where, is it my local college decision for continuous enrollment for military, since the definition of continuous enrollment identified by RDS is not the same for active duty military?
Let me respond to that one. So, yeah.
I'm sorry.
No. This is a good question, because I would say, no, you don't need to worry about them. Here's the situation. This is where this becomes very convoluted. Sometimes you have to look situation specific of all the conflicting laws. So a student who gets that out in other words, they have said to the military that North Carolina is not their permanent residence, but because they're stationed here, they get the in-state tuition eligibility, okay? So a student like that, as long as that student is never going to be passed on to the clearinghouse to keep extending them forever. And the idea was, so let's say the student's at a community college right now, and then 2 years from now, they want to go to a 4-year, but the parent has long since left. They want to stay behind, but they're not independent, that they don't keep piggybacking on that indefinitely. However, there is a provision in the statute when you have that active duty military that allows the student to keep the determination as long as they're enrolled continuously in the same program.
Correct.
So you wouldn't have to track it if they're continuously enrolled.
Right. And but is the continuous enrollment definition that which is determined by RDS saying that they can miss a fall and they cannot miss a fall and spring consecutively, or is it a local determination of continuous enrollment? Can I give you my situation? Easier.
Let me give you a quick answer. Depending on how difficult it is, we might need to do one-on-one, but because we're getting a lot of questions here, but and I'm happy to do it. I would say it's got to be based on the RDS definition, that if continuous enrollment is maintained, that they did not sit out for a fall and a spring. Summers don't count. And as long as they stay continuously enrolled in that, yes, it would be up to the campus to monitor that.
Okay, but the document, the RDS, what is it? The Residency Determination Service Guidebook said on page 14 says the definition of continuous enrollment discussed in this guidebook does not apply to active duty military.
Okay, I'm gonna have to think about that, because that's one of the questions that would fall to me to make a decision policy-wise. If I will put my email in the chat, I will follow up with you.
Okay.
And let me find out why. At the back of my mind, I remember there's some sort of slight difference in the wording in the statutes, and that's probably why. But
so Michelle, my response is to your email: contact Gene Ritter.
Thanks, Dr. I appreciate it. I figured it was going to have to go somewhere. I just didn't know where.
All right, so this is a fun game. Stump us. Gene and I argue about this stuff all the time. Not argue, scratch our heads mostly, because some are confusing. So this is your shot. If you have anything weird, if we can't answer it here, we'll try to take it offline. I just put my email in the chat as well. feel free.
Jesse, Gretchen S. asked the question. She said, I know we've danced around this kind of situation. Just so I'm clear, a student lived here all or most of their life and graduated high school here. Parents wait until student finishes high school to move out of area. Student stays behind. Parents' current address is out of state. Student's address is in state. Parents are helping financially support student from afar. Will student be in state if parents file taxes in North Carolina for previous year, regardless of their current address?
All right, so there's a couple things in play here. You don't immediately lose your North Carolina residency if your parents leave. So there's the statutory grace period, and that goes for like one shot deal. If I move to Virginia and I realize that Virginia's only for lovers and not for normal people, so I move back. Okay, I didn't give up my North Carolina residency. Now I can't move to Tennessee and try it again because I've already used my shot. So, stay put. So immediately they don't lose the in-state status. Then at that point, the student should, after the statutory grace period, they should return to RDS, do a determination, get the out-of-state tuition, and immediately notify their campus so that they can start getting billed a whole lot more. How you gonna know if the student doesn't tell you? Who's gonna know? Nobody's gonna know. Who's gonna know? So now there's Gene. What do you want to throw anything on 5-year rule? Anything there?
Well, I was going to say, this is one of those, when you get to some of these, Gretchen, unfortunately, there's not an easy answer. We have something that's become a joke because when I developed the training at RDS, a lot of times I get questions like this, and my answer is always, it depends. There's several factors at play here. A worst case scenario, the student would not immediately lose residency. You could put them on the grace period. But it is possible if they moved and came back within that certain time frame, and or it is possible, there was actually one court case that led to a provision in the guidebook about 5-year for a non-minor. It is possible that if the student truly has a year-round residence, they're not just here going to school, and they're here and under certain circumstances, and they really never moved with the parents and then came back, it could be possible under a different provision. We'd really have to get all the details and get more information, but it is possible they could keep it, or worst case scenario, maintain it for a year to give them the opportunity to try to establish their own residence.
But in the most generic, technically after that grace period, they're supposed to self-report, but unless they're a state grant recipient or something like that, the campus finding out is kind of on the student. So yes, we danced all over that one.
Thank you, Gene and Jesse. The next question from Jeremy G. RDS classification of outer end for military exceptions. We have the MILI and MILD student types. Are individual campus responsible to track documentation?
Yeah. You're definitely supposed to, check that DD 214, make sure that we've got either a separated military member, right now is within the 3 years, make sure that they were honorably discharged, that kind of thing. So yeah, we're supposed to track that. If there's any other questions about it, you should definitely be using some nulls to make sure that it's still, if it's orders and they're here on orders and they're about to expire, you should probably put a flag on that so that you can check back and make sure they haven't been extended or whatnot. But yeah, those types of things. And really, even with the folks using Veterans Choice Act, we're supposed to have that statement that the student is intending to establish domicile in North Carolina. So all those things are supposed to be tracked local.
I think Dr. Kelly had his hand raised.
Good morning, Dr. Kelly.
Good morning, team. You guys are doing a great job. I couldn't get my hand raised in time for the previous question about the high school student. And just want to throw out two other ideas, and Jesse and Jean, you can tell me if I'm wrong, please. But I think one option would be also, if the person happens to not be a U.S. citizen, the public high school graduate could be an option for them. So that might be one thing you could try. And the other one is for all of these interesting scenarios that come up, don't forget about the business sponsorship. The business sponsorship is not just for immigrants or just for people with DACA status. That's for pretty much anybody. I remember at one institution I was at, we had a lot of business sponsorships, and most of them were U.S. citizens. And it was just something that was a common practice at that institution. So if that high school student is working someplace and that employer, that North Carolina employer is willing to pay the tuition, then that employer gets paid charged the in-state rate. And there's nothing that says that that employer cannot recoup those funds from the student somehow. So there's all kinds of interesting scenarios that happen behind the scenes that you may or may not know about. Now, I'm not advocating for indentured servitude or anything. However, there are, and the statute is very vague when it defines what a North Carolina employer is. So be careful that you don't put too many restrictions locally on something that the general statute does not. So I don't know, I may have opened a big, huge can of worms there, but I wanted to make sure that they knew about those other options.
So for our next training on how to be sneaky, Dr. Kelly will be telling us ways to circumvent the rules.
Hey, I didn't say that. Not at all.
No, but this is a good point
because currently being recorded.
Yeah, no, I mean, but that you raise a good point, because some things are very clearly worded in a statute. These exceptions, to my mind, are not, and reside within the community college system to define. So, those are certainly options to consider. By the way, that student we discussed, the start of this, about the student whose parents moved. If this student came into an appeal and let's say they were looking to transfer and the situation's changed, and well, I had in-state before, now they're going to transfer to a 4-year and needed a determination or something. I mean, in a case like this, if the student could demonstrate that they've truly been living here and working here and didn't move with the parents, I mean, we're probably going to find in favor of the student. The ones we would not is the student who came here, enrolled in a 4-year, and on summers they go, quote, home. They haven't established a permanent residence. So to me, there's a difference when a family moves away, the student stays behind and really has not surrendered their North Carolina residency.
And that just, kind of, I was joking with Dr. Kelly there for a second, but, a lot of these statutes, there's definitely some gray in there. And the folks at RDS, it is not their job to ring the bell when we get an out-of-state student. What they're trying to do is make sure the student gets the benefit of the doubt and is matching the North Carolina residency statute, because ultimately this is about taxpayer dollars. We don't just want to say everybody's in state, but the folks at RDS will really work with a student, to get, if there's something, they're going to try to get there. And, some of the statutes, or rules in the statute, you can read one way, somebody else reads it another way. The marriage one is contradictory in the middle of it. But ultimately, this is not a punitive thing. We don't want it to be a hindrance. So if you can figure out an interpretation and, assist a student, go for it. We're up on 5 minutes, so if we've got any quick ones, we'll try to get those.
Kevin E did have one situation where a student who graduated high school just a couple of years previously was living with his grandmother in North Carolina. She was not financially dependent. Her dad lived in North Carolina, but her mom claimed her own taxes. Parents were divorced, and she was out of state. Because of the mom's dependent claim on the student, would the student automatically be considered out of state?
Not automatically. And Gene can talk to this. There's a special part of the statute that speaks about divorce and separated parents and where their domicile is. But just because one fiscally claims the student doesn't necessarily mean that that's the student's domicile.
So, yeah, I mean, here's again, you've got like 3 different provisions in law. We need more detail. So this is the type of student that needs to come to an appeal. If the student was living long-term with the grandmother, might be a 5-year rule, even though the other. If the student was living, the dad lived in, if this, we'd have to look at it. I mean, like, for example, if there's a clear provision, for example, that if the student's living with a biological parent in North Carolina and the other parent claiming them's in another state, they're good. It doesn't have to be claiming them. So there's several pieces at work here. I'm hesitant when you get these real complicated individual scenarios to give you here's what's always going to be the case. This would be a student who should come back on an appeal. And I think, to me, the logical question is, if they were living long-term with the grandmother, then that probably would be the way to qualify them.
And I think that kind of covers the ones that are in the comment, unless I've missed something, Dr. Hickman.
I think that's all I see also. So do we have any questions apart from the chat box? We have 3 minutes left. Okay. One just came up. Can you read that, Antonio? Oh, no, that was just a response. Okay, so I don't think we have any other questions. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank Jesse Cross, Gene Ritter, Antonio Jordan, and Heather Azu for creating such a wonderful presentation. Just to let you know, after this, this presentation has been recorded and it will be uploaded to you shortly with a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. So if you have any other questions apart from today's, please send them to myself, Jesse Cross, or Gene Ritter, or Dr. Kelly, and we'll make sure we get them to the appropriate person. So with that being said, thank you and have a wonderful day.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Gene.